The sun bled crimson across the scarred plains of the unsettled west, casting long, hungry shadows over the small, struggling homestead of the Vance sisters. A broken fence, a raw, gaping wound in their meager defenses, lay shattered for weeks, a constant, painful reminder of their vulnerability. Then, a silent stranger, a ghost of a man named Silas who seemed to materialize from the very dust, appeared. With calloused, capable hands, he mended the rift, replacing splintered wood with solid timber, tautening loose wires with an almost surgical precision, and then, as swiftly and mysteriously as he had arrived, he vanished without a single word. He left behind only the undeniable evidence of his labor, strong timber and resilient wire, and a profound, unsettling silence. That night, by the flickering, oil-starved lamplight within their humble, drafty cabin, the sisters, Elara and Lena, found themselves locked in a fierce, whispered argument. Their dispute was not over the astonishing repair itself, which was beyond reproach, but over the mysterious, unsettling debt of kindness he had imposed, and who among them would dare to confront the unspoken obligation, who would dare to thank him. The sun, a fiery orb, beat down on the Thorne sisters' ranch, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock their dwindling prospects. Elara, her hands calloused like ancient leather, gripped the shovel with a weary resolve that matched the stubborn set of her jaw. Lyra, though softer in frame, moved with a similar ingrained weariness as she hauled water from the almost dry well. Their small homestead, perched precariously on the edge of a vast, unforgiving plain, felt less like a home and more like a besieged fortress against the relentless indifference of the land. The fence, a crucial barrier against errant cattle and opportunistic predators, stood as a testament to their struggles, its weathered posts leaning at precarious angles, its barbed wire snapped in multiple places. It had been their father's pride, a symbol of his determination, but since his passing 2 winters ago, maintaining it felt like wrestling a ghost. Every repair was a battle against dwindling supplies and exhausted bodies. One sun-scorched afternoon, a glint of metal caught Elara's eye beyond the swaying mesquite trees. Her heart, a weary drum in her chest, skipped a beat, then hammered with suspicion. Strangers were rarely a blessing in these parts. More often they heralded trouble. She reached for the old rifle propped by the cabin door, its familiar weight a cold comfort in her trembling hands. Lyra, sensing her sister's sudden rigidity, followed her gaze, her own face tightening with a fear she tried to conceal. What they saw defied expectation. Not a raiding party, not drifters demanding hospitality, but a lone man. His back was to them, broad and solid under a sweat-stained shirt. He moved with an economy of motion, deliberate and efficient. A hammer rose and fell with rhythmic precision. He was mending their fence. Not simply surveying it, not passing by, but actively, painstakingly hammering new posts, restringing wire, closing the gaps that mocked their security. Elara's grip on the rifle tightened, her knuckles white. Who was he? What did he want? Her mind, always primed for deceit and hardship, spun through a dozen sinister possibilities. Men didn't just mend fences for free. Not in this land, not for 2 women alone. Lyra, ever the softer soul, felt a different kind of tremor. A flicker of bewildered hope mingled with her apprehension. His movements spoke of competence, a skill they desperately lacked in this particular task. He worked with a quiet intensity, as if the fence were his own, the repair an urgent, personal mission. They watched him for a long time, hidden by the cabin's shadow, a strange tableau of suspicion and quiet labor. His hat, a wide-brimmed protection against the sun, obscured his face. He seemed oblivious to their presence, absorbed entirely in his task. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of fire and blood. But still, he worked. The rhythmic clang of metal on wood was the only sound for miles, a stark contrast to the usual chorus of cicadas and wind. Finally, as twilight bled across the sky, he straightened, stretching his back with a groan that carried faintly on the cooling air. The fence, a long stretch of it that had been an open wound on their land, now stood proud and sturdy, its new wire glinting with grim resolve. He surveyed his work for a moment, a faint nod of satisfaction barely visible. Then, without a glance toward the cabin, without waiting for thanks or acknowledgement, he simply walked away. His stride was unhurried, fading into the deepening shadows as silently as he had appeared. He left behind only the scent of fresh-cut wood, newly turned earth, and a meticulously repaired fence. Elara and Lyra exchanged a bewildered glance. The rifle still felt heavy in Alara's hands, but the immediate threat had vanished, replaced by an unsettling mystery. They walked slowly toward the newly mended section, their boots crunching on the dry earth. Alara ran a skeptical hand along a taut wire, testing a newly driven post. It was solid, more than solid. It was strong. Lyra, her fingers tracing the smooth grain of a fresh post, felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. It was a gift, undeniable and perplexing. That night the small cabin was thick with an unfamiliar tension. The aroma of their meager supper bean and salt pork hung heavy in the air, but neither sister ate with much appetite. The mended fence, a silent sentinel in the darkness, dominated their thoughts. "He expects something," Alara finally stated, her voice tight, echoing the suspicion that had hardened her heart over the years. "No man does that for nothing." She rose, pacing the worn floorboards, the rifle now resting beside the hearth. "It's a trap, Lyra. He'll come back, demanding payment or worse. Laying claim to the land, perhaps." Her mind conjured images of greedy men, of promises broken, of the ceaseless battle for survival. Her physical strength, while a shield, could not ward off every kind of predatory male gaze. She had learned early to distrust the kindness of strangers, especially men, who often saw her broad frame and powerful hands as an invitation to exploit or a challenge to dominate. Lyra, curled by the small flickering lamp, picked at a loose thread on her worn dress. "But what if he doesn't, Alara? What if he just helped?" Her voice was soft, laced with a vulnerability that Alara often found exasperating. "The fence is strong, stronger than we could have made it with our supplies. He asked for nothing. Perhaps he was simply kind." Lyra remembered the quiet focus of his movements, the patient precision. It had not felt like the calculated approach of a predator. "Kindness is a luxury, Lyra, one we can ill afford to believe in," Alara retorted, her voice sharp with a lifetime of bitter experience. "Especially when it comes from a man. They always want something." She remembered the leering glances, the backhanded compliments, the way men often equated her physical stature with a lack of gentleness or femininity. No man had ever truly seen past the too big frame to the heart within. Lyra sighed, the sound a whisper in the small room. "Then how do we thank him, if he returns, if he doesn't?" "The fence is mended, Alara. We owe him." Her hands twisted nervously. "It feels wrong not to acknowledge it." Alara stopped pacing, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers in the hearth. The argument, unspoken for years, now surfaced, her pragmatic suspicion versus Lyra's yearning for decency. "We don't thank men like that, Lyra. We watch them. We wait. We protect what's ours." Her voice was final, yet a sliver of doubt, unacknowledged even to herself, pricked at her hardened exterior. The fence was indeed strong. Too strong to be ignored. The night after the fence mender's mysterious departure brought a change in the weather, as sudden and fierce as a wildcat's pounce. A brutal norther swept down from the mountains, bringing with it a chilling rain that turned the sun-baked earth into a slick, treacherous morass. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the cabin's single window pane and threatening to tear the roof from its weary beams. Alara and Lyra spent the night huddled by the fire, listening to the tempest, their relief over the mended fence tinged with renewed anxiety about the elements. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world slick with mud and shivering under a bruised sky. A dense fog, thick and blinding, clung to the land, muffling all sound, transforming the familiar ranch into a ghostly, alien place. As Alara stepped out, rifle in hand, to check on their small herd of cattle, a sound, faint and distorted by the fog, reached her ears. A low moan, a choked gasp. Her heart seized. It wasn't the sound of an animal in distress. It was unmistakably human. Following the sound, her boots sinking into the saturated earth, she stumbled upon him, near the creek bed, the fence mender. He lay sprawled awkwardly, his body half submerged in the swirling, muddy water, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. A jagged branch, ripped from a cottonwood tree by the storm, lay beside him, its sharp end crimson. He was alive, barely, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his face pale beneath the grime. Alara's first instinct, honed by years of self-preservation, was to retreat, leave him. He was a stranger, a man, a potential threat. But the sight of his vulnerability, stark and undeniable, halted her. He wasn't the inscrutable, competent figure of yesterday. He was just a man, broken and bleeding, adrift in the unforgiving dawn. The rifle felt heavy, suddenly useless. "Lyra," she roared, her voice hoarse, cutting through the fog. Lyra appeared moments later, her face blanching at the sight. Between them, they managed to haul his heavy frame from the creek, the effort straining their combined strength. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and the wound on his shoulder oozed sluggishly. He groaned, a guttural sound that tore through the cabin's silence. Inside, the small space felt even smaller with his unconscious presence. They laid him on the rough cot usually reserved for storage, his breath hot and shallow against the cool air. The task of tending to his wounds fell to them, two women whose experience with healing extended mostly to livestock. Elara, ever practical, cleaned the laceration on his shoulder with whiskey, her movements precise despite her internal turmoil. Lyra, her brow furrowed with concern, gingerly straightened his mangled leg, wincing with every soft clack of bone she heard. He cried out, a guttural sound that tore through the cabin's silence. For days he hovered on the edge, a fever raging through his body, his dreams punctuated by restless murmurs and sudden choked cries. They learned his name from his delirious ramblings, Caleb Thorne, an echo of their own surname, a strange, unsettling coincidence. They spoon-fed him broth, changed his bandages, and whispered reassurances they weren't sure he heard. Their roles had been violently reversed. The mysterious helper was now utterly dependent, and the suspicious recipients were now his reluctant saviors. The forced intimacy of cohabitation chipped away at their defenses, slowly, incrementally. Lyra, with her softer touch and innate empathy, found herself spending more time by his bedside, a damp cloth cooling his fevered brow. She observed the faint lines of hardship etched around his eyes, the quiet strength that remained even in unconsciousness. His hands, though calloused, were surprisingly gentle in his sleep, often twitching as if still mending unseen things. She wondered about his past, about the life that had brought him to their broken fence. Elara, meanwhile, maintained a vigilant distance, watching him with a hawk's keen eye. She still expected a trick, a sudden change, a demand for repayment. Yet, as she watched Lyra fuss over him, and as she herself applied fresh poultices of herbs she knew gathered for their own ailments, she couldn't deny the flicker of admiration. He had, after all, mended their fence. Selflessly, the tangible proof of his generosity stood firm against her ingrained cynicism. When the fever finally broke, leaving him weak but lucid, the awkwardness returned, magnified. Caleb, his voice hoarse, tried to thank them, his dark eyes filled with a gratitude that seemed painfully sincere. "I'm beholden to you, ladies," he rasped, pushing himself up slightly, wincing. "You mended our fence," Elara said, her tone clipped, as if to remind him that their assistance was merely a reciprocation, not an act of pure charity. She still guarded her heart, afraid of letting in any vulnerability. Lyra, however, smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that warmed her face. "It was the least we could do, Mr. Thorne. You saved us more trouble than you know." She liked the quiet strength she saw in his gaze, even when weakened by illness. It was a strength that didn't demand or dominate, but simply was. Caleb, for his part, was a man of few words, his presence filling the cabin with a quiet intensity. He watched them, observing their daily routines, the rhythm of their lives, their unspoken communication. He noticed Elara's fierce independence, the way she handled heavy tasks with a strength that belied her age. He also saw the slight slump of her shoulders after a long day, the way she sometimes stared out at the horizon with profound, almost desolate loneliness. He saw past the hard exterior she presented past the too strong label others had undoubtedly pinned on her, and he noticed Lyra's quick, observant mind, her sensitivity to the natural world, the way her gaze often drifted to the setting sun, lost in thoughts he couldn't fathom. Her gentleness was a balm to the starkness of their existence, and he saw the small, vulnerable flicker beneath her sometimes nervous demeanor. He did not see the odd one or two dreamy woman that others might have dismissed. As he slowly recovered, his presence became less of a burden and more of a quiet fixture. He couldn't yet work on the ranch, but his observant eyes were sharp. He noticed a leaking roof, a loose hinge, a splintered tool handle. Without being asked, he'd indicate the problem, or, once he could move more freely, begin to fix it with the same quiet competence he'd applied to the fence. He carved a new, stronger handle for Lyra's water bucket, whittled a peg for a stubborn door, and sharpened their dull knives to a razor's edge. Small acts, but deeply impactful in their isolated world. Elara found herself watching him, not with suspicion now, but with a growing, grudging respect. His actions were never boastful, never demanded praise. He simply did what needed doing. His understanding of practical needs, of silent labor, resonated deeply with her own nature. She even found herself, on occasion, offering a quiet word of thanks, a nod that spoke volumes in their taciturn world. Lyra, meanwhile, began to seek his quiet companionship. She would tell him about her small patch of herbs, the wildflowers she found blooming in unlikely places, her aspirations for a small, sustainable life on the ranch. He listened, his gaze steady, his occasional sparse comments surprisingly insightful. He never dismissed her dreams, never patronized her gentleness. His presence was like a quiet, sturdy oak in their often turbulent lives. The argument from that first night about how to thank him now seemed absurd, distant. His continuing presence, his quiet helpfulness, was a constant, unfolding answer. They were no longer just indebted to him for offense. They were slowly, imperceptibly becoming accustomed to his steadfast presence, to the silent strength he brought to their struggling lives. The cabin, once a fortress for two, now held a delicate, fragile truce among three, bound by a shared vulnerability and the slow dawning of mutual respect. With Caleb's legs slowly mending, the ranch found a new, quiet rhythm. He was still limited in his movements, but his hands, once again capable of fine work, became an extension of his observant mind. He sat by the hearth, whittling, mending tack, sharpening tools, always busy, always productive, his gaze missing nothing. He learned the sisters' routines, their unspoken signals, the way Elara would purse her lips when the cows were restless, or Lyra would hum a low tune when the bread was rising just right. It was during this period of forced convalescence that the true strengths of each Thorn sister began to unfurl before Caleb. He had initially seen Elara as a bulwark, a woman carved from the same granite as the land itself. He had observed her boundless physical strength, her capacity for sheer, unyielding labor. But as he watched her in the quiet moments, during the long evenings when she repaired torn garments by the dim lamplight, her brow furrowed in concentration, he saw something else. He saw the fierce protector, the meticulous planner, the one who bore the heaviest burdens not out of obligation, but out of a deep-seated love for her sister and for the legacy of their land. One evening, a calf was born weak and sickly, its breath shallow, its legs too frail to stand. Elara worked tirelessly through the night, her large hands gentle as she rubbed warmth back into its shivering body, coaxing drops of milk from its indifferent mother. Caleb watched from his cot, silent, observing her raw vulnerability, the despair that etched her face when it seemed her efforts would be futile. It was a side of her he hadn't anticipated, a profound tenderness hidden beneath layers of hardened pragmatism. Lyra, meanwhile, revealed a different kind of strength. Her artistic eye, initially dismissed by Caleb as mere fancifulness, proved to be an invaluable asset. She identified edible plants in the arid landscape, their healing properties known from old tattered journals left by their mother. Her fingers, nimble and precise, wove sturdy baskets from willow branches gathered by the creek, and she cultivated a small, resilient herb garden where others saw only dust. Her quiet determination, her intuitive understanding of the subtle nuances of nature, was a testament to her unique resilience. Caleb observed the way Lyra could soothe a skittish horse with a few soft words, the way she seemed to feel the shift in the weather long before the clouds gathered. She possessed a quiet wisdom, an inner sight that connected her deeply to the rhythms of the land. He saw past the dreamy or flighty girl others might have judged, recognizing instead a profound connection to life that sustained their small, isolated world. Their conversations, initially sparse and guarded, began to deepen. Over shared meals of simple stew and hardtack, they found common ground in their shared love for the land, their mutual understanding of its unforgiving beauty. Caleb, in his quiet way, started to share fragments of his own past, not grand tallies of heroism, but small, poignant anecdotes of a life lived on the fringes, of lessons learned through hardship. He spoke of his time as a surveyor, of the vast empty spaces he had mapped, the silence that stretched for miles. One afternoon, Lyra asked him about the intricate carvings he often whittled from scrap wood, small, stylized birds and animals that captured a surprising sense of movement and life. His hands, though rugged, moved with an artist's precision. He looked at her, a rare, soft smile touching his lips. "My mother taught me," he said, his voice a low rumble, "said even in the hardest times, there's beauty to be found, if you only look close enough." Lyra felt a connection spark between them, a shared appreciation for the subtle poetry of life. Elara, observing this quiet exchange, felt a curious ache in her chest. She had always dismissed such pursuits as frivolous, as distractions from the relentless demands of survival. Yet, seeing the genuine pleasure in Lyra's eyes, and the quiet contentment in Caleb's, she began to question her own rigid practicality. Perhaps there was more to life than just mending fences and counting cattle. Perhaps there was room for beauty, for art, even for soft whispers of the heart. He even, on one occasion, quietly offered advice on how to reinforce a sagging beam in the barn. His suggestions, practical and sound. Ilara, to her own surprise, listened, absorbed, and found herself respecting his judgment. Their roles were not neatly defined as man and women. They were three individuals, each with unique strengths, each contributing to the survival and the slow blossoming of their small ranch. The romance, if it could be called that, was not loud or passionate, but a slow, tender bloom, like a desert flower after a long drought. It was in the shared silence, in the knowing glances, in the unspoken understanding that passed between them during chores or over shared meals. Caleb's appreciation for Ilara's steadfastness, her resilience, was evident in his steady gaze, a gaze that saw beyond her physically imposing frame to the quiet strength and loyalty within. For Lyra, it was his quiet attentiveness, his willingness to listen to her thoughts and dreams, his recognition of her unique way of seeing the world. He treated her sensitivity not as a weakness, but as a different kind of strength, a window into the soul of the land itself. When he once presented her with a small, perfectly carved bird, a symbol of hope and freedom, her heart fluttered with a warmth she hadn't known she could possess. The sisters, meanwhile, found their own bond deepening. The presence of an outsider, particularly one so observant and quietly capable, forced them to confront their own dynamics. Liara's gentle nature, once a source of frustration for Ilara, was now recognized as a vital counterpoint to her own hardness. Ilara's practicality, once seen by Liara as stifling, was now understood as the bedrock upon which their lives were built. Their shared journey of tending to Caleb, of working side by side with him, forged a new kind of family, unexpected and profoundly felt. The ranch, once a place of solitary struggle, began to feel like a sanctuary, not just from the harsh world outside, but from the internal battles they had each waged against their own vulnerabilities and societal prejudices. Caleb Thorne, the mysterious fence mender, was slowly, quietly, mending more than just their fence. He was repairing the frayed edges of their spirits, one gentle, unspoken act at a time. Just as a fragile peace began to settle over the Thorne Ranch, the outside world, with its relentless prejudices and demands, came knocking. The first hint arrived with the local cattle buyer, a corpulent man named Silas Croft, who rode up with two burly hands, his eyes sweeping over the property with an avaricious glint. He had always seen the Thorne Ranch as ripe for the taking, two women alone, struggling, their father gone. He had made offers before, derisory sums that barely covered their debts, confident they would eventually buckle under the pressure. This time, however, he found a different scene. The fence, newly sturdy, the barn door repaired, the general air of quiet competence that now permeated the place. And then, Caleb. His presence, though still limping slightly, his arm in a sling, was undeniable. He stood by the well, a silent, watchful sentinel, his gaze steady and unyielding as Croft's eyes narrowed. "Heard you got yourself a hired hand, ladies," Croft sneered, his gaze lingering on Ilara's strong frame with a familiar, unwelcome appraisal. "Good for fetching water, or something more. Domesticated?" His words were a thinly veiled insult, a jab at their unconventional lives, and Ilara's lack of traditional feminine appeal in his eyes. Before Ilara could unleash the sharp retort that sprang to her lips, Caleb stepped forward, his voice a low, calm rumble that cut through Croft's bluster. "The fence holds. The cattle are accounted for. Our business is our own." His tone carried an authority that surprised even Ilara, a quiet power that made Croft hesitate. Croft, clearly discomfited by this unexpected male presence, spat on the ground. "Just remember, ladies, this land ain't worth much without a man to run it, or to protect it from unforeseen troubles." The implied threat hung in the air, cold and menacing, before he spurred his horse and rode off with his men. The encounter left a bitter taste. Ilara's internal walls, momentarily softened by Caleb's presence, now rose again, reinforced. "See, Lyra," she said, her voice tight with resentment, "they still see us as vulnerable, as property. And a man, no matter how quiet, only draws more attention." She turned away, her broad shoulders hunched with a familiar burden of defiance and self-preservation. Lyra, however, felt a different kind of fear. Croft's words about unforeseen troubles echoed in her mind, preying on her more sensitive nature. She had always yearned for acceptance, for a gentler world, and the harsh realities of the frontier often felt like a physical assault on her spirit. The external threat, however, soon materialized beyond mere words. A string of accidents began to plague the ranch. A section of the repaired fence was inexplicably cut, allowing their meager herd to scatter into the arid plains. Their water trough was fouled. Tools went missing. Small, insidious acts designed to wear them down, to remind them of their vulnerability. Ilara's anger burned, a fierce, protective fire. She rode for days, tirelessly rounding up the dispersed cattle, her body aching, her spirit defiant. Lyra, meanwhile, tracked the saboteurs' clumsy footsteps, her keen eye for detail noticing a specific unusual boot print, a bent nail, a discarded chewing tobacco pouch, small clues that pointed not to random vandals, but to a deliberate, calculated campaign of harassment. Caleb, though still recovering, joined their silent vigilance. He reinforced the new fence with hidden traps, set up tripwires, and spent nights watching the perimeter, his rifle across his lap, his gaze sweeping the moonlit plains. His leg, though still stiff, now bore his weight with more confidence, his movements regaining their quiet efficiency. One night, as Ilara returned from a grueling day of searching for their last missing heifer, she found Caleb tending to a newly mended tool. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time she saw not just quiet strength, but a deep, empathetic understanding. "They're trying to break you," he said, his voice low, without judgment. "They've been trying for years," she replied, her voice rough, her shoulders slumping with fatigue. "Ever since Pa died. They think because we're women, and not like other women. We're weak, easy to conquer." The words spilled out, raw and unguarded, revealing a lifetime of hurt and defiance. Caleb simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "They see what they want to see, Ilara, not what is. There's strength in you they don't understand. A different kind." He wasn't complimenting her physical power, but her inner resilience, her spirit. For the first time, a man saw her not through the lens of societal expectation or physical appearance, but through a genuine appreciation of her character. Lyra, witnessing this exchange, felt a knot in her stomach. The external threats were pressing, but the internal walls, especially Ilara's, felt impenetrable at times. She admired her sister's strength, but also worried about the toll it took, the way it isolated. The external pressures were designed to exploit their internal divisions. Croft knew that fear and isolation could break even the strongest spirits. He was counting on the prejudice of the wider community, the ingrained belief that two women, especially two unconventional women, could not possibly hold their own against the harsh realities of the frontier, without a proper man. But Caleb's quiet presence was subtly changing the dynamic. He didn't try to take over, didn't diminish their capabilities. He simply stood with them, a silent partner, his skills complementing theirs, his unwavering belief in their inherent worth slowly eroding the bitterness that years of prejudice had fostered. The escalating harassments from Croft culminated in an act of calculated cruelty, a fire set deliberately that engulfed their small rickety hay barn in the dead of night. The glow of the flames painted the night sky an apocalyptic red, a stark tableau of their vulnerability. Ilara and Lyra, roused by Caleb's urgent shouts, fought with desperate fury, hauling buckets of precious well water, their faces streaked with ash and tears. The hay, dry as tinder, crackled and roared, a hungry beast consuming their winter provisions. Caleb, his mended legs still stiff, moved with surprising speed, directing their efforts, pulling burning timbers away, his strength and clear-headedness a beacon in the chaos. He didn't try to protect them from the fire itself, but stood by their side, a silent, unwavering presence, fighting with them. He saw their courage, their refusal to yield, a defiance that burned brighter than the flames themselves. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, a black scar against the gray morning. Exhausted, defeated, the sisters sank to the ground, their bodies aching, their spirits bruised. The loss of the hay was a devastating blow, jeopardizing their cattle's survival through the coming winter. "It's over, Lyra whispered, her voice raw with despair, tears finally streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. "We can't fight them. He'll take the land. He'll win." The internal walls that protected her sensitivity crumbled, revealing the raw fear beneath. Ilara, usually resolute, could only stare at the ruins, her own formidable spirit wavering. The exhaustion was bone-deep, the injustice a bitter bile in her throat. Croft had finally found their breaking point. Caleb, who had been silently sifting through the charred remains, knelt beside them. His gaze, usually guarded, was now open, filled with a deep, quiet resolve. He looked from Lyra's tear-streaked face to Alara's desolate despair, seeing beyond the physical exhaustion to the deeper wounds of shattered hope and prejudice. "He thought he'd break you," Caleb said, his voice low, almost a murmur, yet it carried an undeniable strength. "But fire doesn't break what's forged in steel. It purifies." He paused, then looked directly at Alara, his dark eyes holding hers. "Your will is stronger than any man's ambition, and your heart sees the truth others miss." He didn't offer platitudes or empty promises. He offered acknowledgement, a profound understanding of their inner fortitude. His words, simple yet potent, resonated deep within Alara. For so long, she had equated her strength with her ability to shoulder burdens alone, to remain impenetrable. Now, hearing him speak of her will and heart, not as separate entities, but as integrated parts of her formidable self, something shifted. Her walls, painstakingly constructed over years, began to crack, not under assault, but under the gentle force of pure, unbiased acceptance. Lyra, meanwhile, looked at Caleb, and in his eyes she saw not just compassion, but a profound belief in their worth. His words about her heart seeing truth spoke directly to her artistic, sensitive nature, affirming a part of her that had often been dismissed. "What do we do?" Alara asked, the question escaping her lips almost involuntarily, a raw plea that shocked even herself. It was the first time she had ever admitted such uncertainty, the first time she had sought counsel from anyone, especially a man. Caleb rose, his gaze sweeping over the charred landscape, then settling on the distant hill. "We rebuild, and we fight back, not with their meanness, but with our strength, with the truth." He outlined a plan, a strategy that blended Alara's practical grit with Lyra's keen observational skills. He suggested using the very terrain against their enemies, setting up a system of early warnings, and gathering evidence to turn against Croft in the nearest town's courthouse. But the real turning point wasn't just the plan. It was the unspoken choice each of them made in that moment. Alara chose to dismantle her internal walls, allowing herself to lean on Caleb's quiet strength, to trust his judgment, and to embrace the truth of her own resilience, not just her toughness. She found that accepting help didn't diminish her, it amplified her power. Lyra chose to shed her fear and embrace her unique insights, realizing her sensitivity wasn't a weakness, but a profound connection to the world around her, a connection that could protect and guide. She reached out, placing a hand on Caleb's arm, a small, tender gesture of trust and connection. And Caleb, in turn, allowed his own guarded heart to open further. He had long carried the burden of a past trauma, which had made him wary of deep connections. But in the fierce, unyielding spirits of these two sisters, in their raw honesty and profound inner beauty, he found a reason to fully invest, to believe in the possibility of belonging. The days following the fire were a crucible, forging the three of them into an unbreakable unit. Their strategy against Croft unfolded with a quiet precision that belied the simmering tension. Alara, leveraging her intimate knowledge of the land, mapped out patterns of intrusion. Lyra, with her almost uncanny observational skills, meticulously documented every piece of evidence, the specific boot print, the type of tobacco, the time of day, crafting a narrative of harassment that was both damning and undeniable. Caleb, recovering his full strength, became their silent enforcer, not with violence, but with a strategic presence that deterred further direct sabotage. Their journey to the nearest county seat, a dusty, sprawling town a day's ride away, was undertaken with grim determination. Alara, dressed in her best, though still rugged clothes, held her head high, her gaze unflinching. Lyra, carrying a satchel filled with her carefully gathered evidence, walked with a newfound confidence, her unique spirit shining through her composed demeanor. Caleb rode beside them, his presence a silent shield, his steady gaze meeting the curious, often hostile, stares of the townsfolk. At the courthouse, Silas Croft, smug and confident, was taken aback by their unified front. He had expected two broken women, ready to sell their land for pennies. Instead, he faced a formidable trio, their truth backed by irrefutable evidence. Alara spoke with a quiet power that commanded attention, her words cutting through Croft's bluster. Lyra presented her meticulous findings, her soft voice imbued with the unshakable conviction of facts. Caleb, though speaking little, offered a silent testimony of his steadfast support, his presence alone dispelling any notion of the sisters being vulnerable or easily exploited. The judge, a weary but fair man, listened intently. The evidence was overwhelming. Croft, facing charges of harassment, arson, and attempted coercion, was fined heavily and issued a stark warning to cease all contact with the Thorn Ranch. The verdict was not a triumphant roar, but a quiet victory, a testament to their resilience. Returning to the ranch, they found a different kind of peace. Not the uneasy truce that had existed before, but a deep, earned tranquility. The external threat of Croft was, for now, neutralized. But more profoundly, their internal walls had crumbled, replaced by foundations of trust and unwavering affection. That evening, as the last embers of the sunset painted the sky, they sat on the porch, a quiet tableau of shared history and dawning future. The argument about thanking him, which had once sparked such division, was now revisited, but with a tenderness born of profound understanding. "We never properly thanked you, Caleb," Lyra began, her voice soft, her gaze meeting his with an open, honest warmth. "For the fence, for everything." She gestured vaguely to the thriving ranch, the sturdy barn, the palpable sense of home. Her hand, instinctively, reached for his, her fingers tracing the calluses on his palm. It was a gesture of intimate gratitude, a silent acknowledgment of his gentle strength. Alara, sitting beside them, looked from Lyra's hand and Caleb's to the vast, star-strewn sky. Her heart, once a guarded fortress, now felt expansive, vulnerable, yet profoundly free. She had always believed love was a weakness, a luxury she could not afford. But Caleb, in his quiet, steadfast way, had shown her that it could be the greatest strength of all. She reached out, covering Lyra's hand and Caleb's, a silent embrace of their shared bond. "He saved us, Lyra," Alara said, her voice husky with emotion, a rare tremor softening its usual steel. "Not just from the fence breaking or the fire. He helped us remember who we truly are. He saw us." The last words were a whisper, a profound admission of a yearning she had kept buried for decades. She looked at Caleb, her eyes, usually so guarded, now brimming with a fierce, tender love. "Thank you," she said, her large, capable hand pressing gently into his, a silent promise of partnership. Caleb looked at them, these two extraordinary women, so different, yet so fiercely bound. In Alara he saw the unwavering bedrock, the courage that held the world together. In Lyra he saw the vibrant spirit, the heart that found beauty even in desolation. And in their combined strength, in their open acceptance, he found a home, a true belonging he had never dared to hope for. "There's no thanks needed," Caleb replied, his voice rough with emotion, his gaze sweeping over their faces, filled with a deep, quiet affection. "What we have, it's a shared thing. A new beginning." He understood that the thank him argument was not about repayment, but about the profound emotional debt of seeing and being seen, of accepting and being accepted for who they truly were. The romance, long a slow burn beneath the surface, finally flared into open warmth. It wasn't a choice between the sisters, but an intertwining of their lives, a recognition that Caleb had become integral to their future. He was not a man to choose one over the other, but a man who had come to cherish both, and through them found his own place. They stood together on the porch as the first stars pricked the indigo canvas of the sky. The ranch, once a place of struggle and solitude, now buzzed with the quiet hum of purpose and connection. The cattle, safe within their mended fence, settled for the night. A rebuilt barn, solid and resilient, stood as a monument to their shared. The prejudice of the town, though still a distant murmur, held less power now. They had forged their own truth, their own definition of family, strong and unconventional, against the harsh backdrop of the frontier. The fence, mended for free, had become the first thread in a tapestry of shared lives, woven with resilience, respect, and a love as vast and enduring as the western sky itself. Years unfolded like the slow turn of seasons on the vast plains, etching deeper lines of wisdom and contentment on Alara's and Lyra's faces. The ranch flourished, a beacon of resilience and unexpected life, tended by three hearts now inextricably bound. Caleb Thorne, no longer a mysterious stranger, became the quiet, steadfast anchor of their shared existence. His own deep wounds healed by the profound acceptance he found. The world outside might still whisper of the unconventional Thorne household, of the two strong women and the quiet man who lived with them. But their sanctuary was built on a foundation impervious to judgment. They had learned that true beauty was not in the delicate curves of a woman, nor in the brute strength of a man, but in the unwavering spirit, the compassionate heart, and the quiet courage to be authentically oneself. Prejudice, once a heavy cloak of shame, had been shed, revealing lives rich with purpose and connection. The fence, mended so long ago for free, stood not as a barrier, but as a symbol of the enduring bond forged in shared hardship and unwavering love, a testament to the unexpected freedom found when one dares to truly see beyond appearances. Their story, whispered on the wind, spoke of a unique kind of love, as rugged and beautiful as the land they called home.